we'll just dive into what fasting is. Fasting is basically, in a nutshell, it's not eating, right? But there are different constraints around the time. So different types of fasting have different types of time constraints. Now, there's intermittent fasting, which is, it's important to understand these rules. So like when we talk about IF, intermittent fasting, this is not calorie restriction. So when you're doing this is not calorie restriction. It's not calorie restriction, I should say. So intermittent fasting is not caloric restriction. We're eating the same amount of calories that we would typically eat in a normal day. We're just restricting the time frame to a certain time period in the day. So for example, with intermittent fasting, the 16-8 method means that you're fasting for 16 hours and you're eating for an 8-hour block, but you are not restricting your calories. Same thing with this 20/4 method is you're fasting for 20 hours, you're eating all of your calories within a 4-hour block. And so those are types of intermittent fasting. And why is that important to understand? Because if you're losing weight, if you're trying to keep weight on, if you are just barely keeping it together, like you're wasting away or you're emaciating, as many people with chronic inflammatory disease are, intermittent fasting is perfectly safe for you to do because it's not restricting your total caloric intake, it's just restricting your window of eating. Whereas other forms of fasting, this is where we get into more restriction in calories, that might not be a great idea. So if you're anorexic, if you're struggling to keep muscle mass on, then fasting where you're restricting your total caloric intake may be a bad idea for you. So keep that in mind when we're talking about fasting, because a lot of people are confused about this. Intermittent fasting is not calorie restriction. It is window time frame restriction, whereas some of these other methods are caloric restriction. So getting into some of these other types of fasts, you can see here the 5-2 method, where you restrict caloric intake to 500 to 600 calories for 2 days a week. So, again, 5 days of the week, you're eating a normal amount of calories. 2 days a week, you're restricting your intake down to 500-600 calories. So it's more, not so much an intermittent fasting model as much as it is a reduced caloric intake model. And then we've got liquid diet fasting. And liquid diet fasting is where you're restricting your calories, but you're also eating your calories in fluidic form. So you're taking in fluid. So this, an example here might be where you're using broths like bone broth, or we're using soups, or we're using juices like fresh juices and things of that nature. So you're reducing the stress of your gut having to digest food. That's what fluid fasting is helpful for. So where fluid fasting, again, if you're wanting to know, is this beneficial to you? It might be if you struggle with indigestion, gas, bloating, where when you eat a meal, you feel full constantly and you feel like you can't digest your food. Or if you're constipated all the time, like juice fasting might be, or liquid fasting might be helpful in those types of regards. It's not something you can sustain forever on, but again, it's just a form of fast. And then we have some of these others that have been popularized in just the lay press, like Eat, Stop, Eat, which is a 24-hour fast once to twice per week. So you're actually taking 2 of your days, unlike the 5-2. The 5-2 is a 500 to 600 calorie restriction 2 days a week. Eat, Stop, Eat is 1 to 2 days each week. You're completely fasting for a 24-hour period of time. And then there's OMAD, 1 meal per day. This one is considered a form of intermittent fasting, because again, you're that 1 meal a day that you're eating, you're not restricting your calories. You're just hammering yourself with, whatever your caloric intake for the day is. So if you eat 1,500 calories a day, you're getting 1,500 calories in that 1 meal a day. So this is one of those things. This is not a beginner strategy. 1 meal a day, because you have to allow for your stomach to expand. You've got to allow time for your stomach to adopt to sitting down at a meal where you might be eating 1,500 to 2,000 calories in a meal. Most people can't do that, starting out. So this is a strategy you work up to. And then there's the warrior diet, which is small amounts of raw fruits and vegetables during the day. And so in essence, you're grazing during the day and you're eating one large meal per day, usually typically at night. And then there's alternate day fasting, which is a 75% energy restriction every other day. So this is, kind of similar to the 5-2 method, only this is every other day where you're reducing your total caloric intake by about 25 or 75%, again, every other day. And then there's 1 day and 3 day fasting. These are caloric restrictions. So again, this one here, the alternate day fasting, the 1 and 3 day fasts, the eat, stop, eat, and the 5-2 method. So those are all calorie restriction type of fasts. So again, if you're asking yourself which fast is right for you, if you're trying to gain weight or if you're wasting, you don't want to do caloric restriction without guidance. Okay, so this would be, just in my opinion, not something that you really want to do. Let me put an E there, but that's caloric restriction. So again, these others, which are intermittent fasting strategies, are more just, again, a window where you're limiting the quantity of time that you eat. And what intermittent fasting does is it gives your GI tract a prolonged resting period. Hey, don't forget to check out the rest of the series right here. Make sure you hit subscribe below. And as always, thanks for tuning in.